Welcome to Stress-Free IEP. You do not need to do it all alone. With your host, Frances Shefter, Principal of Shefter Law. She streams the show live on Facebook on the last Tuesday of every month at noon Eastern. Get more details and catch prior episodes at www.shefterlaw.com. The Stress-Free IEP video podcast is also posted on YouTube and LinkedIn. And you can listen to episodes through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Stress-Free IEP, Frances Shefter.
Good afternoon and welcome to the show, everybody. I'm so excited to introduce my next guest on our show, Scot Marken from EdRedefined. And I'm so excited because this is a little bit different than we usually do. Usually I focus on IEPs, but you're not on IEPs as much. You're more, well, I'll let you introduce yourself and let us know what you do, Scot.
Sure. Thanks, Frances, for inviting me. So I'm Scot Marken, and I actually specialize in supporting individuals with disabilities with a focus on autism, ADHD, mental health issues, and learning differences with post-high school plans. And that may be college, it may be a gap year, it might be a combination. And so I do a lot of work with IEPs as part of understanding students and helping them understand and their families understand what is available in terms of support in college and what is not available and what's the type of process that you go through.
Right. And it's interesting that you say that with IEPs, because IEPs is in IDEA, which just covers up through some's 21st, some's 22nd birthday. So what do you do if a student has an IEP and they're getting ready to go to college? What can they do to get any of the services or supports that they had in high school?
Sure. So that's a great and a really important question. So the first thing is that many people think parents, sometimes school administrators erroneously think that your IEP automatically transfers over to college, okay? And it does not. And as you had just brought up the IDEA, the main law that governs accommodations for students in college is related to the ADA, or the American with Disabilities Act, and that is about access to services, okay? And so essentially, there's a variety of ways that you can get support in college. Most people tend to think of accommodations because if they have an IEP or they have a 504 plan, right, they get accommodations. And that is one main way, but not the only way in college. And essentially, after you are accepted to college and you decide to commit to one school, then you would go reach out to the Accessibility Services Office or Disability Services Office and pursue accommodations, and you need to show various documentation, have meetings to go ahead and discuss what is, I don't love this term, but what's the functional limitation of your disabilities on your education. And one of the big differences that I think you maybe just heard me say is you need to go do it, okay? And that's very different, right, than what happens in the K through 12 setting. You need to go.
Right. And you is the student, not the parents.
Right. So that's a really good point. Okay. So sometimes at the beginning, parents are certainly involved. Okay. However, it's best, for the student's long-term success, for the student to be as independent as possible in the process. I do help students go ahead and understand accommodation, prepare for their accommodations meeting where they need to go ahead and discuss, what it is that they're seeking and why they're seeking that. And so often, I do want to say one more thing while I'm talking about parents. So there's something in college called FERPA. I'm not actually sure what the acronym stands for, but it's essentially the educational privacy rights of the student. And another big, shock to a lot of families and parents in particular is that parents don't receive information from colleges. They don't receive the grades. They don't receive, if there's a notification that you're on academic probation, because FERPA protects the student's right to educational privacy. So there's some ability to go ahead and have students, if they're willing to, waive their rights regarding FERPA so that parents can get some more information directly on their own beyond what the student shares directly.
Right. And so it's the student gets everything. I know that's hard for parents because they've been in control so long.
Right.
And a lot of times parents will say, but I'm paying the bill.
Right. So that's like a great point. Okay. And so I think, and then you have on the opposite, some, students who go ahead and say, leave me alone. I'm completely independent now. Right. And they maybe had accommodations. They say, I'm not using those anymore. Right. And so I do think while it does actually rest with the student, you need, a collaborative way that you work together as a family. And, because the parents are the ones that are typically paying, the parents, I like to say, I think it's helpful for parents to give parameters to the students. And then, the student needs to take the lead. So the parameter may be, I'm not comfortable with you as the student or my child flying all the way, across the country for college and being 3 hours at an airport. Okay. Because, when you've needed some support, it's needed to be much faster than that. And the student may not like that. I actually see that frequently, but in that regard, the parents are the ones that are paying. But then the student really needs to be the one to go ahead and take the lead. And while you're still in high school is a really good time to go ahead and start gradually showing more independence. And I'm curious what you think about this. Okay. But I do a college readiness assessment as part of my work where, I look at the academics, yes, but the two big areas that is needed for college success that's typically different than high school is your independence, your level of independence and your living skills, life skills, as well as your self-advocacy. So I look at where a student is with regards to academics, self-advocacy, independence, and social emotional, and create a plan for them of what do they need to work on before they go to college and what type of supports would be beneficial, whether it's offered by a school or whether it's private support that's brought in. And so here's where I'd love your feedback is I typically will suggest that you fade out the accommodations from your IEP or 504 plan in the second semester of your senior year, because you're not going to go ahead, the ones that you're not going to get in college. Okay.
Got it.
So something like extended time for tests, if you have the proper documentation, very common, you'll get that in college. Okay. The big one that is very atypical in college, that is a big shock a lot of times to families and makes the student anxious, and that's why they need to work on it earlier, is that there's not extra time for assignments. So if you're used to going ahead and saying, oh, I didn't finish, it's due tomorrow, I could 50% extra, I'll turn it in 2 days. So because that doesn't exist, with everything I say, there's exceptions, okay, but because it just doesn't exist, going ahead and fading that out, I think, is a good idea in the second semester of.
Yeah, I could see where that could be helpful depending on the child, because they're not going to get it in college. And it's kind of like you want to prepare your child to be independent, right, and not need it. I don't think there's a problem with that. I mean, I think that's a good idea. And I want to go back to something you said about that you do the assessment to see on the independence. I love that. And I think students need to do that in 10th grade when they're applying for colleges. And the reason I say that is because the transition part of the IEP is usually, it's the worst. It's look at 4-year colleges, where from your assessment, the independence goals, that should be on the IEP and the transition part. And the school should be helping the child with those goals to be able to do the transition.
Right. So it's interesting you say that, okay, because what I see with my work are there are some families that are starting early, in 10th grade, as you're saying, because there will be a lot of changes happening. It's something also to know the skills that you need to go ahead and build in terms of, like, let's just say, not IEP specific, but many students have a hard time getting up in the morning. Okay, most teens do, right? But like your parents waking you up every day or pounding on your door, to go ahead and make sure that you're up. You're not going to get that in college. So those are type of skills that, working with a student and earlier is important. So I see that, okay, and I think ideally that's what you want. But I also see people who start the process very, very late because they're concerned. I'm not sure whether it's the student or it's the parents, the family, or everyone, whether the student can go to college because of some of the jump up in skills that you need. So they don't know and they wait. So I've actually started with some students. So if there are seniors right now in high school, you can still go ahead and apply to college. And if you've done nothing, I've actually worked with students that this is not advised, okay? Not advised, but that I started, who wanted to go to fairly academically competitive schools and had some of the skill set to do that, but they didn't start till Christmas week. And most people think of applications that are due January or beginning of January, sometimes January 15th, and you can apply early for different schools starting in November. But so you still can do it. Your options may be more limited. So there's never really too late, but the disclaimer is don't wait. As check it out.
Right. And that's, part of the reason I was excited to have you on the show is because I think people don't know you exist.
That's correct.
People don't know there's somebody that can help me with this process. And as parents, children don't come with, instruction manuals, and children change on their parents every single day. And every year it's something different. And so one of the things I like to do with my law firm is just put it out there saying, look, you don't have to do it all alone. We have people in the community that can support you through this process.
Right. And so, I appreciate that. So, my work is super specialized. And so I work all around the country. I think right now I like to say support, not help, supporting students in, I think, 13 states. And, that has varied. But I can support a student and a family for couple of months to understand the process to several years, because I actually, in addition to helping with the application process, I do some work around transition for people in college and some non-academic support for students once they're in college, because it's often, it's the softer skills that can be very challenging, and the type of support that exists in college often is focused, on the academics, because that's why people are there. But just to your point, if people don't know about me, almost all referrals, word of mouth. And it's really fascinating because it may come from a therapist. I get a call that says, so-and-so therapist in, Monterey, California, suggested I call you. And I don't know who that person actually is,
I've had that happen.
Right. I from various schools, I have some relationships with schools that are private schools that focus on learning differences around the country. I do a lot of presentations because not everybody can afford the supports, right, that I might provide. And so I really believe in the importance of giving back. And it is very confusing for a lot of people. Plus, I do want to just say, I'm not sure if I've shared this with you, but I live this as a parent every day as well. Okay. I have two children who are in college, one who has some significant disabilities. And then actually, I'm going to switch gears for 1 second, if this is okay. Sure. So my daughter received some accommodations in college, and she did not have an IEP in high school. Okay. And there's several students that I have that might have a late diagnosis, or let's say this is a reason why people hire you, Francis, right? They're having challenges with the school system of an agreement of what is needed. So I've supported numerous students that had very minimal support, let's say through a 504 plan, or had nothing, and they're able to get some accommodations in college because they may, one, have new documentation, or also mental health is a really big reason, and it's the biggest growth of accommodations in college. And so the type of documentation you need for mental health challenges is different than if someone is dyslexic or someone's on the autism spectrum.
You must have been reading my mind, because my next question was going to be like, do you help children that do not have IEPs and do not have 504 plans? So if parents have a child just going to college, can you work with them as well?
Yes. So here's what I do as part of that assessment that I said. I get to know the student, the family. I speak to people who know the student, non-family members, to get how the student, is in different settings. And I look at what documentation they have, whether they have diagnoses, whether they believe those diagnoses or not. And then, while I cannot guarantee any type of accommodations, I'll go ahead and I'll say, this is very likely not sufficient. And if you have none, it's what could you use? And as I'm sure you know, and you probably had guests guessing related to this, or they spoke about neuropsychs, which are very expensive to do. And by the way, colleges do not pay they don't have to pay for the testing, unlike in high school. So if you want some sort of support, I speak with the family about what does that mean? Let's talk about the type of supports that you could possibly get. And then, what would you need to do in order to go ahead and get documentation for a specific learning difference? Sometimes it's actually easier if a student, so many people have co-occurring challenges. So if you have a learning difference and you have a mental health issue, for mental health, again, every school is different, disclaimer on the bottom here, but if you have a mental health issue, usually the documentation is some type of an evaluation from a mental health provider within the last 6 months, while the documentation, psychoeducational evaluation, a neuropsych, historically has been like within 3 years, if you've had it within 3 years. But schools are many colleges are trying to be more flexible with that. It depends. So if you don't have some let's just go ahead. Maybe this is too detailed for this, but I think it's important. So say you're somebody who has documented learning differences around reading, and you also have significant anxiety, okay? So an accommodation such as extra time, 50% time on exams. So you would probably get that, right, for the learning difference, okay, because you're reading. If you don't have the actual documentation required for the reading diagnosis that's current, and you don't want to pay $5,000, $6,000, to get the documentation, always helpful, I think, to understand about who you are and how you learn, okay? But if you have anxiety and you can show through a mental health professional that you have anxiety, very common also to get extended time on tests. So as a result, you might be able to receive the same accommodation with different type of documentation. So that's what I would counsel a family on as part of it.
And it's so again, this I say all the time, like, when do you need to talk to an attorney about the IEP process? And I always say the earlier the better. Why? The same for you. The earlier the better, because you can help set the stage that the child has everything they need so they start college with the accommodations. Where if parents wait until the child's gotten in and then contact you, it might be a few months until they get all of the documentation and your child's already gone through a semester before they get the accommodations.
Right. So that's definitely true, right? And, I am addressing that right now. Okay. Families thinking about, do they want accommodation? Do the children want the children to have accommodations? I'm going to say there's a big caveat, just going back to what we said before about the student's independence, because they could all be put in place and you do all the stuff that you said, in order to go ahead and have it early and make sure it's in place before you start in day one. But the student has to be the one who wants to use it and access those accommodations. And so, I'm sure you see with your work too, there's students and you work really hard for clients, you get them accommodations and then they don't want to use them, right? It's much more likely to happen, I think, in college because there's not like, for example, an annual IEP meeting. You don't have that. Actually, students not only need to take a lead, they often need to actually renew their accommodations every semester. And it's not like a whole full IEP meeting where there's 10 people in the room and everything that typically happens, general ed teacher, all sorts of things. So often it's going to the disability services or accessibility services and saying, yes, I want to continue these. And so it becomes very much on the student, and then also is very much an executive functioning issue for students who have challenges with time management, organization, because if they don't go back and say, hey, I want to use these accommodations again and fill out whatever paperwork, they're going to start the second semester and they are not going to have their accommodations in place. So that's, something that somebody needs to be counseled on and, potentially, help support them to put reminders. One other thing that's sort of along those lines that is like very surprising to people is, so one accommodation, right, very common is if there's a lot of distractions in high school, you can go take an exam in a quiet room, right?
Right.
So obviously every school is different, but most students I've spoken to, they show up in their regular class, so there's attendance, and then whoever is taking the exam in quiet goes together and leaves and goes to a separate room. So historically in college, it doesn't work that way. There might be another building that you go to for the exam. And so you have to on your own go there. But what's more, really a lot more independence is in some schools, you have to contact the disability services or accessibility services a week or 2 weeks in advance of your exam to say that you want to go ahead and use that accommodation so that they can have it set up for you to be somewhere. And so if you forget to do that, you literally cannot just show up and say, this is just too noisy for me. I'm very anxious. I can't, I need to go somewhere else. It's sorry because you did not go ahead and request the accommodation a week ago. So again, a lot more planning that's needed in order to.
Right, because colleges don't have, like under IDEA, schools are required, they have the child find law to find the children that need the accommodations and be there and put it out there. But colleges have no obligations whatsoever, other than ADA, but they also don't have to go make sure you're using it and make sure you have it. It just needs to be available for use.
Correct. Now, I will say, though, that there are some types of support you can get in college that you can't get in high school, right? Because some of the stuff that we've just been talking about, to some people who are listening, watching, can maybe be very anxiety producing, right? Thinking about the type of supports that the student currently gets. But for example, you can get an accommodation with the proper documentation that's approved by the school, disclaimer, that is, you can get priority registration for your courses, okay? And so as an example, you can't just say, I have ADHD, I need this. You actually have to show and explain what's the, again, I hate this, functional limitation of having that. So you could maybe say, you know what, I can't take 3 classes in a row because I don't have the focus for that. Or I take medication that makes me, go to sleep at night and then I'm very groggy in the morning. So I can't take classes that start before 10 a.m. And, particularly for freshmen, people hear about the 8 a.m. class. One of my kids has an 8 a.m. class now and struggle for him to get there this morning. Okay, literally. But so you can go ahead and get that as an accommodation, which super helpful. And sort of a secondary thing, hopefully no one's listening from they're listening from the ADA, office, okay, the accessibility office, but it's also a good way for like classes that are super popular that people want to get into. It's an added benefit, they can sign up for some of those classes, So there's also residential support, depending on disabilities. The residential support, mostly, it's not that someone's coming to check in on you and is your room organized. It's mostly through accommodations is you can get potentially a single room or a private bathroom, or something like that. Now you need, but it makes sense, but the college is not responsible for paying the difference between a single and a double. Okay, so you have to do that. And I have a whole workshop on the hidden costs for students with disabilities to go to college, because there's a lot of things that, the supports are there at the school or privately, but you may need to pay for some of them. So anyway, there's also supports that all students can get, not specific to someone with disabilities. Like, for example, the vast majority of colleges offer free tutoring. Now, the tutoring is done typically by peers. There's someone, upperclassman, who took the class, did great in the class, really likes the subject matter, and then so they're tutoring, someone who's it doesn't have to be an underclassman, because you can get the tutoring, throughout. So potentially really helpful. However, with that said, they're not taught about learning differences. And so if you're someone who's dyslexic, having a peer tutor may not be that helpful for you, because the way they're going to teach it is not the way that you learn best. And so you still may end up needing a private tutor. But some schools do have, a limited number of tutors that are learning specialist professionals, and you need to ask. Typically, I either counsel people or on their behalf, I may need to reach out to 7 different departments. Again, very different than high school. It's not you go to this one place. It's not centralized. And, the starting place is disability services, but they often just deal with the accommodations, and they can guide you to other campus resources, but it's not where they take place.
Got it. And I want to focus on something you keep saying, different colleges, the disclaimer, like not all colleges and so forth. Yeah. Do you help families find the best fit of the colleges that will provide the accommodations that the student might need?
Oh, that's a big part of what I do. Okay. So with that said, the actual formal accommodations, if someone qualifies, they're pretty much the same in each school. Okay. However, I have this chart that I show where there's like about 4,000 colleges in the country. Okay. And so there's a college for you, most likely. Right. And if we picture like sort of a line, like a bar graph, on the left side are colleges that only give you what's required by the ADA. Okay. And most people, or I would say all the people that I support, that is not going to be a good fit college for them. Not because just what they'll get, which they'll get what they're required to by the law, but I think it gives off that the school is very likely not the culture that they want, right? The school does not have, it's not inclusive, it's not empowering to people with disabilities, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there are a few schools in the country that are specifically only for students who are neurodiverse. And then, there's a gradual increase from ADA only to, separate schools for colleges, but for people neurodiverse. And what I help people do is figure out what is it that they need and willing to use. Okay. Like, again, if if the student's not willing to use it, I'll tell you, do not go get the neuropsych done, because, right. Like, you've paid a lot of money and it's good to know, but is the student going to use it, or your child going to use it? So, And then I'll let them know, and I do outreach to these different departments to say, okay, many students that I particularly support have social challenges. So I will help individuals develop a social plan. And I'll figure out the extent of, depends how much people want, but typically it's pretty deep,
Right.
of where are the best social opportunities at these schools for me. For a lot of people, it might be a club or an activity, but just because it says like there's like, say you're really into, I don't know, cooking. I really like to cook. Okay. For another show, I tried out for Master Chef one time. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But
My father owned a chain of cooking stores, so I grew up in the cooking industry.
All right. Off camera conversation.
Yep.
So, but anyway, like it may look fabulous that there's this cooking club that you're really interested in, but how many people are involved? Okay. Like right now, particularly for students, past few years and students, applying this year and probably next year, these clubs were really affected by COVID. And, in some cases they had to stop completely because certain clubs you can't do virtually. And with student leadership, it could have been a really popular club, the cooking club, but now it's just rebuilding. And so I help students, again, with their lead of what they see themselves doing, understand whether the social life is on campus, where off campus it is, to try to help them figure out, if that's something that they're seeking, which most students are, how's the best way, for them to sort of jump right in. Because the first semester, research has shown that like people's connection to their school the first semester and that transition really affects whether people stay at school or not, and unfortunately, the retention and the graduation rate of students with disabilities is a lot lower than individuals, that do not have disabilities. And a lot of it's because people don't know, which is why it's great to be able to talk here today, because they just go somewhere without fully understanding what's available or not, or the schools don't have the supports, or they're not implementing them the way they should, or there's not enough supports. So really the transition period is really very important.
Right. No, yeah, it's so true. The social aspect. And also, like, I know recently I've been seeing a lot more colleges have for the neurodiverse children. They have special programming and so forth. They're starting to be more accepting.
Right. So not everyone who is neurodiverse needs a neurodiverse program. Okay.
Right.
So, that's part of an assessment that I do is, right. So maybe you have an autism diagnosis, but that could mean that you go somewhere and, potentially have no accommodations, but you want some help around social skills, right. And social planning. That's it. It's not part of accommodations. It would be beneficial to go to a school that offers, say, an autism support program. There's about 80 some odd schools in the country that have autism support programs. And what they are, because a lot of people don't understand this, I think it's important if I could just to share, because some people think they do way more than they do, and other people that are concerned about stigma cut them off without really knowing what they do. So students who are in autism support programs, they're typically 4-year universities, and you're a regular matriculated student, and it's extra support anywhere typically from 2 to 5 hours a week. Okay.
Wow.
And does that mean you think that's a lot or not a
No,
lot?
just that they're doing that they're giving that much support.
Well, a couple things. One, for most of them, you pay. Okay.
Got it.
Some you don't, but there's one school in California I know that, a parent was really grateful, and the student obviously too, who graduated. So they made a large donation. So in that school, you don't pay because it's underwritten.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super nice and really helpful. But typically, so if someone has 5-hour program has 5 hours of support, you're probably going to have like 1 hour of one-on-one coaching, which for some people or many people is not enough. So that may need to be supplemented, right? So I would look and say, based on your particular situation, Francis, is that enough? Or you can supplement with a private coach. There's a variety of things you can do. Then, there's, let's say, again, we're talking 5 hours, 2 hours, that is some sort of a skill-based workshop. Maybe it's about time management. And then, some programs, not all, but some programs offer some social opportunities, and they organize, going out to the movies or going to a restaurant. And some people really like taking advantage of that. People who are introverts, people who like that it's just, you just show up, you pay the $15 to go to the movies, you don't have to organize any of it. And there's some other people that, they may want some of the coaching support from the Autism Support Program, but they don't want that for their social outreach and social life. So, and then some of them have study halls where, not mandatory, but people are encouraged to go. There's not a tutor there, but there may be somebody to help people sort of get started with executive functioning around doing the schoolwork. So those programs are growing. They're definitely growing around the country. And hopefully, I think, right now, colleges, my understanding is, often see it as it costs them money to have to deliver these extra services. However, as more data is available, it's really encouraging that in programs, typically the students that are participating in those programs have higher graduation rates than students that are not, higher retention rates. They also, just from a monetary standpoint, of course, it's different, but more likely to potentially stay on campus and give the university actually more revenue. Someone I know who does some work with me, also just on his own, helping universities set up some programs. Actually talks to them that it's not only good for society and it's good for students, but it's actually a good business decision as well. So hopefully more colleges will see that.
Yeah, like my dad said, cost benefit analysis.
Right.
Spend a couple $100 here and it could increase your revenue by thousands, and trying to figure out what it works. And it's interesting you say that some schools have the program, but kids don't access it. Yeah. I like to say, but even if you don't want to access it, it's good to go to that school anyway, because the school's more open to having neurodiverse children.
That's a really good point. Okay, and I think that's like not a black and white issue, but figuring out as part of the process when you're going to college is how inclusive does the community, seem to be. Obviously, they are making a commitment as a school that they are having a program. It may vary by professor, because a lot of stuff ultimately is what the professor wants to do, of, unfortunately, how they respond to individuals that are their students. But I do agree with you. Another thing that I really like for students that I support is looking at something that, again, not part of an IEP, right, but a way for support in college, is a first-year experience. So, it's kind of the way it sounds, meaning that, every school has some sort of an orientation. And those orientations, could be 2 days, that could be 4 days. But some schools turn that orientation into a much bigger experience, hence first-year experience. So really helping people transition to college. A lot is focused on the academics, but some is social, residential. So maybe you're in an orientation with a cohort of people from your dorm, and there's a peer leader, and that peer leader in a school may stay with you for the entire first semester and have like meetings every week, in your dorm. How's everyone doing? Things are going, some, team building activities. So schools like that often are very helpful for people who need some extra support. Some schools, I check this as well, offer pre-orientations, early orientations. Some actually do offer them for individuals who are registered with disability services. And some might be, you're interested in community service, outdoor adventure, you're a first gen student. And that's a really good way for people to, get connected to the school, meet a small group of people before they start. You know what? As I said that, and I'm looking at you about the child find, it just made me think that what we haven't said is that the student needs to be the one to go register with disability services or accessibility services. The school is not going to find you, okay?
Right.
So when schools tell you stats, actually what I often do is, I'll call up a school and I'll ask them, how many students are registered with a specific disability, to get a sense of perhaps, does the school have a lot of experience with students that more than, black and white, this is the accommodation, but more of the gray areas, And a lot of times people are not aware of that, students and families, that they have to go register. And then to your point earlier, by the time they understand it, well, then they've already lost time. It will take time to then get it going, share the information with your professors, and you could have lost a whole semester. Or you made the semester super difficult, because you didn't know about some of the ways you can get support.
Right. So that brings me to, I just realized the time, and wow, it was so easy talking to you. Like, it was just like,
I talk a lot too, but
no, it's fine. I think it's such valuable information for parents, that we know that there's stuff out there to help. And there's people out there to help us find the supports we need. So how do people get in touch with you? What do they do? Do you do consultations? Like, how does the process work?
Sure. So I actually offer a free consultation. So that's typically like 30 minutes. And typically, I actually start out by saying, what is it that you want to accomplish and learn from this? And I learn more information. And I will never, like in a consultation, recommend a school to someone, because that's not fair in terms of, I don't know the student enough. It's not fair, to obviously my own work. And then I'll see if I think that I'm a good fit or not. And then, people, again, can choose to work with me for a segment, such as, please help us by doing a college readiness assessment, or everything through, the search, the applications, the accommodations, the transition to college. And so you can contact me. Best way is you can sign up for a free consultation at my website, which is actually ed as in education, redefined, edredefined.com. And I could give a phone number, but it's probably better, right? We'll have the links below to everything. But this was so awesome. Thank you so much, because I even learned a lot. Like, I knew what you did, but getting into those details of how supportive you could be is so important, I think. Oh, thanks. I really appreciate it. And, I hope I provided advice that's helpful to people, and to let them know that there is, a lot of solutions that are out there. And you might need to be educated about it, because, as you said, it doesn't just, you're not naturally hearing about it.
Right.
Not that much, or not in the level of detail that you need to know. Yeah.
Exactly. All trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to Stress-Free IEP. Hopefully we'll see you again.
You've been listening to Stress-Free IEP with your host, Frances Shefter. Remember, you do not need to do it all alone. You can reach Frances through shefterlaw.com, where prior episodes are also posted. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others through YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.